Hello. As Cody said, my name is Jonathan. Today we're talking about reality and specifically talking about a connection that exists between reality and time. Thanks. So reality and time. My name is Jonathan Cutrell. You can find me on Twitter at @jcutrell. Of course, I work for Whiteboard, and Cody's already told you about that. Developer T did hit 3.5 million downloads today, which is kind of mind-boggling to me. You can check that out too. We have some shirts out in the, I guess this is a foyer, I don't know, main area, and some stickers, so take those, they're free. I did co-found Spec. If you're not a developer, you still would probably enjoy Developer T if you're not a developer, but if you're a designer, there's also other podcasts on the Spec network that you would enjoy, like Design Details, for example. So I want to take a few minutes and rewind a little bit with you. As you saw out on the table, there were Pogs. You remember Slammers? There were no Slammers out there. I couldn't get my hands on any. They were kind of rare anyway. So, but Pogs were such a important part of my young childhood. This may have been a little bit later for some of you, but in the 90s, I would sit in my friend's basement and we would look and trade Pogs with each other. I had no idea how to play the game. I just remember seeing the images of the Pogs, and I kept them for years afterwards. And later on in life, even though this kind of mixes in, kind of melds with the same memories, I watched Kenan and Kel. I would come home from school and I would sit in front of the TV and eat a very strange snack. It was potato chips dipped in cream cheese. Awful snack, but I was home alone, so nobody could tell me not to. And I watched Kenan and Kel, and hopefully I had orange soda along with Kel. So that was such a vivid memory. It was at like 4 o'clock, and then 4:30, all that would come on. And the next day, I would talk about the show with my friend at school. And at school, by the way, we had these pens, right? These pens were, it's essential that you have yellow ink with you at all times. So if you don't have these, then you may be out of luck, right? And at the end of the school week, my family and I would go to Blockbuster. And we would rent a movie. The family would kind of pick out a movie for the family night on Saturday. And I was allowed to pick out a Nintendo 64 game. I did not have a PlayStation. I had a Nintendo 64. And this was such a vivid memory. I remember standing in line and I saw the cookie dough candy that you can't get anywhere else, apparently. You can get it at the movie theater. They had the movie-sized candy in line at Blockbuster because it was kind of like you were going to the movies. I remember this so vividly, and this is gone now. Like, it's not even a thing anymore. Maybe you remember some of these things. Yeah, MySpace. Tom. We were all friends with Tom at some point. The Bulls, whoops, there's a little preview there. Bulls Dynasty, that's a huge memory for me. And some of these things may not necessarily connect with you, but there's memories of this era in your life that hopefully do connect with you. I remember all the guys actually secretly liked chick flicks because we had crushes on the stars. And then on the flip side, girls had Dream Phone. I didn't even know that existed. My wife told me about Dream Phone recently. So all these things, they're so rich to me. They're so rich, but yet they also feel removed. When I think about playing with Pogs, or when I think about trying to take care of my Tamagotchi, which died way too early, it seems so far away. It's like a completely different world, right? A whole different world. I remember my parents actually brought Aladdin home, and we sat in our basement and we watched it. My dad ate these, the sugar daddy, the taffy-looking caramel, basically sugar stick. He sat there and ate that, and we watched Aladdin. Such a good memory, but still so removed from me now. It seems like I'm watching someone else's life, right? Like it's totally disconnected from my reality. It's almost like it's not real at all. And maybe some of you have that same feeling about your past or about a distant memory. Why is that? Why is it that something that I personally experienced, and in that moment, it didn't feel unreal to me? I can remember that it didn't feel unreal, but now it feels so disconnected from me. Why is that? Well, take a second and imagine yourself 183,960 hours. That's 21 years ago, 1995. That's a lot of hours. That's nearly impossible. What were you doing? What were you thinking? What were you wearing? What did you have for breakfast that day? That's nearly impossible to remember. And yet it all happens, all a part of our past reality. Now, on the flip side, imagine yourself in 183,960 hours from now, 2037. We can't even imagine what that would look like at all. But most of us are going to reach that, hopefully all of us. And the disconnect between us and that reality is so apparent when we look at it this way, when we look at it in the terms of 183,000 hours from now. I can't even imagine what that's going to be like. It's like I'm not even going to get there. So what is this connection that seems to exist between reality and time? There is one, clearly. But what is that connection? And I'm not the first person to talk about this, by the way. I didn't discover this connection. It's not my idea. There's some people who have talked about it before. Now, disclaimer, I'm not a philosophy major, so I'm probably going to get some of this off. But there's three basic schools of thought on this connection between reality and time. The first school of thought is this time-independent reality. And this says that anything that ever has been real, anything that currently is real, and anything that ever will be real already is real. That's kind of weird, but that's that perspective. The second perspective is only the things that are real now are real. Anything that ever was or anything that ever will be is not existing. And then the final perspective is kind of a mix of the other two, the growing box idea. The growing box idea says that anything that ever existed before and anything that currently exists is still real, but the future is just an illusion. It's just something we've made up to kind of describe this idea of thinking into the future or thinking forward. But I don't really personally connect with any three of these in my experience. These are kind of academic to me, right? They don't really, I can't visualize how this works for me. And so for me, my experience looks a little bit more like this, okay? In the present, that's the highest form of my own reality, the perception of reality. That's when it's the highest. Right now, everything is very real to me. I feel and I see and I can taste, and all of the things that I'm experiencing now are the most real to me in my life. And as I look back into the past and as I look forward into the future, things get less real, especially if I look beyond my life, right? If I try to think about before I was born, what was happening, or if I try to think about what's going to happen after I'm gone, that reality just kind of escapes me. And if I try to think infinitely into the past or infinitely into the future, to the beginnings or the ends of time, I can't conceptualize that at all. There's no reality in that to me. Now you'll notice that I also have kind of some overhead or some headroom here for reality, and that is simply because we can't perceive everything, right? There's even colors and light that we are not able to see because we're limited by our perception as humans. But beyond that, we're also limited by the fact that we can't be everywhere at once. So there's simple limits on our ability to perceive reality. So I want to talk about both sides of this graph, the past and the future, and hopefully give us some practical ways that we can respond to this kind of picture of the connection between reality and time that we can use in our jobs on a day-to-day basis. So this first part, we're going to talk about learning from the past. Learning from the past. For those of you who are in long-term relationships, how many of your fights are over the same problems? My wife is in the room, and she can attest that not even that long ago, we had a fight over the same thing that we had a fight over at the beginning of our relationship, right? It seems like maybe we should have learned, but we haven't. We still fight over the same stuff. How many times do you use the same excuse for not going to the gym? I got tired. I'm tired. That's a common one for me. How many times have you lost your keys in the same room? This is definitely me. At my house, I lose my keys at least twice a week. Now, on the flip side, on the positive side, how many times have you felt great after going to the gym? It seems to repeat itself, right? You're not going to just feel good once and then, it's hit or miss. How often do good conversations that you have with your friends have the same factors? It's easy to think that maybe we need to set up a particular situation, but really, good conversations happen when we set them up the same way. And this outlines this idea that our past mistakes and our successes typically echo into the future. Right? The things that we succeed at in the past, we're likely to succeed at in the future. And the things that we fail at in the past, we're likely to fail at in the future. This is kind of not intuitive, right? Because it seems like we should be learning from the past. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we don't learn from those failures. Now, it's interesting, though. Why is that? Our perception changes as time moves forward. And our mood changes as time moves forward. When our perception shifts, our reality follows. This is actually some research that goes with this. This is from an article it's on Northwestern site. Each time you recall an event, your brain distorts it. Now, this isn't just thinking metaphysically. This is actually at the physical level. When you think about something, when we were all recalling our 90s memories, our brain changes those memories. Even in a slight way, it's changing at the physical level. Here's another quote from that article. If you remember something in the context of a new environment and time, or if you are even in a different mood, your memories might integrate the new information, right? So as we move away from our memories and then we recall them, they change. So if our perception of reality is faulty, which it is, the further away we get from that reality, our past has little influence over our future. The further away our past goes, the harder it is to use it as kind of a measuring stick. So let's look at this again. That's what this depicts, right? The further away from our past that we go, the harder it is to learn from it. So this outlines kind of the first point here. The earlier we reflect, the better our perception. And the better our perception, the more we can learn from our experiences. So that's takeaway number 1. Reflect early, deeply, and often. This helps us avoid that problem of getting too far away from something and the reality kind of fading away. And instead, we can look at it quickly. And we can see, without having changed that memory too many times, having accessed it so many times that it morphs over that period of time. Instead, we can actually learn from it in its most realistic state. All right, so part 2, looking into the future, preparing for the future. I have a question for everyone. This is participatory. You don't have to act like you're watching a screen now. How many of you have made an error estimating? Raise your hands. If you're not raising your hand, you are lying. If you've ever been late for school or late for work, you made an error in estimating, unless you intentionally were late for work, right? How many of you have made more than one error estimating? Hands again. All right. It's like a support group. How many of you have made an error estimating this week? I'm actually raising my hand. Obviously, we make estimation errors about the future. And really what we're trying to do is forecast what's going to happen in that future side of the graph, right? We're trying to say, okay, this is what I think reality is going to look like in 3 days or 3 hours or, once again, 21 years, 183,000 hours. How in the world can we forecast that far? Well, let's look at a problem that's significantly smaller. Imagine yourself in 3 hours. A fun exercise for you is, if you want to set a reminder on your phone, think about what you think is going to be happening 3 hours from now, and then look at your phone whenever you get that reminder and think, did I match? Did I actually get it right? What are you going to be doing? Where exactly will you be standing in 3 hours from now? What will you have done in those 3 hours? See, it's not quite as daunting to think about 3 hours, but it's still not even 100% clear at that small of a level, right? My wife and I were actually talking recently about our relationship and the course of our relationship. And we were looking at some text messages that we sent each other. Once again, we had that weird feeling like that seems like someone else's life, right? And one of us said, I can't remember who it was, I never imagined 3 years ago that we'd be here doing what we're doing today, right? Be here today doing what we're doing. Yeah. And so what did we imagine instead? Whatever we imagined, that was our forecast. That was our way of thinking into the future, right? And the truth is, the future often doesn't play out like we would expect it to. So I have a very simple question, once again, participatory here. How long would it take you to make 100 sandwiches? Somebody raise your hand. Anyone? Yes?
3 hours.
3 hours, okay. That's a pretty common answer. I could do it in an afternoon, right? But let's talk about the math here. 100 sandwiches times 4 minutes, 4 minutes a sandwich. I don't think I've ever made a sandwich in faster than 4 minutes. That'd be 6.7 hours, right? Like, relatively speaking, unless I've got the math wrong. Do I have the math? I think that's right. And I actually had the same answer. It was 2 or 3 hours. That seems reasonable, right? But why is it that we can make a more than 50% error? If we do that regularly, like that's going to be a problem, right? And far too often, well, we mess up our slides. Far too often, we abuse our future selves by creating unrealistic expectations today because we aren't thinking about, okay, we aren't breaking that problem down, right? And on the flip side, far too seldom do we give ourselves the margin necessary for flexibility, growth, and rest. So like, if you made sandwiches for 6.7 hours straight, you're going to probably pass out after that. Like, that's pretty intense work. I actually had a coworker of mine send me a screenshot of his browser recently. And he had 32 tabs. Not only did he have 32 tabs open, he had 32 tabs open at 11:15 p.m. And I asked him, how long do you expect to spend on these 32 tabs? And we both came to a reasonable estimate of about 10 minutes per tab. This seems about right. A long Medium article may take you 15 minutes, and an email might take you 5 minutes, but reasonably, an average could be around 10 minutes. Well, that's 320 minutes total, or 5 hours and 20 minutes, and he would be going to bed at 4:35 in the morning. That sounds terrible. Now, I don't think that he set out opening those 32 tabs thinking, I think I want to stay up until 4:35 tonight. Right? I think most likely what he did was he opened a tab that looked important, and then he opened a tab that looked important, then he opened another one, and then 29 more times he opened more tabs that looked important to him. And then just kind of expected that, well, I can handle all this, right? I receive digests all the time in my email, and I open up the articles and I try to read all of them, and it's not possible. It's just not going to be possible. In fact, my own email inbox, just the other day, I didn't pick the highest one that I could find. It was literally this week. I had 119 emails in one day. That's 5 per hour if we're looking at a 24-hour scale, or 1 every 12 minutes. Imagine trying to be productive in the spaces between all of these interruptions. How could you possibly do that? The problem is idealism leads to overly optimistic planning, right? And we're idealistic. Creative people in general, we're idealistic. We believe we can change the world, and I don't think that's wrong. In fact, I think that's true. But we think about ourselves like we know what this line is. Like capacity is clear to us. Like we know exactly what we're able to do. And unfortunately, it looks like this. We set expectations that we think are on the capacity line, and in fact, they're higher than what we're able to do. And then we experience this really horrible thing called pain. So I'll tell you a story of my own example of this. I started Developer Tea, and I was doing 3 episodes a week, and which, is a reasonable commitment. And I was having so much fun and getting a lot of people enjoying the episodes, and I wanted to do a 4th per week. And so I decided to start doing, like a mini episode. And obviously, that was way more commitment than I thought it was going to be. So I was doing 4 episodes per week, and I started getting feedback that the episodes, the quality was going down. That's pain. And so I had to change my plan. I had to reduce my commitment to be able to get back to something that was manageable. I actually had a user review that said, you should stop doing 4 episodes per week. Okay. And see, here's the thing. When you experience enough pain, we know this from basic psychology, you start developing this really awful thing called fear. Right? Pain leads to fear. And if you've experienced the punishment of overcommitment, you may respond to that fear rather than responding rationally. What does that response look like? Like this. Instead of actually finding that line of capacity, we just start going into the ground with our estimations, right? Saying it's going to take a year to change some text on a page on a website. It's ridiculous. This is particularly true for developers. I'm allowed to say this because I am a developer. We get these requests that initially we think we're going to be able to do them relatively quickly, and then something unforeseen comes up because we're creating something brand new, and so it's not predictable. Can you get me an estimate today? Is it possible to do X feature before Y date? Are we ready for 1 million users to use this platform? And our immediate answer? Clearly, nope. Right? That's the developer's automatic response because we've experienced that pain of overcommitment. We end up having to work extra hours. We end up losing money, losing time. So fear leads to negatively biased planning. And so what we have here is, this is our common way of working. We have error on both sides of this capacity line. And so often, we have such large error that we go so far down the road in that error, where we've made commitments way out into the future, where we shouldn't be making commitments yet, and we end up experiencing major amounts of pain or being so unproductive that we get fired. Like if you can't do enough in 1 week, or if you overcommit to doing too much in 1 week, that's going to be a problem. There's pain on both sides of this, in other words. So what's the answer? It's actually kind of trivial. This is a much better line, right? The amount of pain that we experience, the amount of underestimation or overestimation, it's significantly better. Now, if you were to zoom in on this one little portion or zoom in on one little portion over there, it might look similar. But the difference here is frequency. Frequency of adjustment. All we're doing is changing how often we actually do that kind of shift, how often we evaluate, how often we are able to feel pain, how often we actually plan. So the takeaway for this future planning is to plan shorter increments. Very simple, plan shorter increments. When we look at this connection between reality and time, we have to understand something, that we don't digest reality in big pictures. I don't think about my life in clear detail from the day I was born all the way up until today, or from today all the way until the day I die. That's not the way I think about my life. I think about my life from the perspective of now. I comprehend my life through a limited perspective. Everything in the past and everything in the future is through the lens of the present. And the present is where we have the most clarity. As we move out towards the other ends, we lose that clarity. And so in our jobs, in our day-to-day creative work, we respond by, number one, reflecting early, deeply, and often, and number two, planning in shorter increments. Thank you.
So I'm wondering what recommendations you have for people who want to get better at learning, but don't necessarily work in an environment that's supportive of learning. So some of us work in environments that are extremely demanding, like get it done now. And I'm fortunate I work at a school where we geek out about learning and we appreciate learning and we give ourselves the time to learn and sharpen our learning skills, but not everybody has that environment.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering what kind of recommendations you have for people who are in an opposite situation for me.
I'm going to say something unusual and say quit. That's one option. In all seriousness, if you are working for a place that doesn't believe that learning is important, you probably don't want to be there for a long time. Because it's likely not to change. If it's not that way now, if you have some personal connection with the people that are there, you might be able to move relationally to encourage them to adopt learning. They may not even realize how important learning is. But if they're inflexible, especially if it's like kind of a larger company, quitting is probably one of the most viable options. Now, that's not always true depending on what your expertise is. I think that every opportunity is a learning opportunity, and so I'm biased towards learning on the job as well, and just documenting it, right, and sharing that documentation. But yeah, I mean, the real answer is we're talking about a resource problem, right? Like, if you're always doing production work and your employer is inflexible and there's no way to change that, then either you have to sneak stuff in somehow, like convince yourself to learn during that production time, or you have to change your employer, either by moving to a different employer or actually convincing them that learning is important. I think it's important enough that that quitting is not out of the scope of options there. I don't often say to quit. I think most employers are reasonable enough to shift around their employees. So.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Some employers think they're providing an environment that's conducive to learning, but they're actually not.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like, or I've been told, well, you need to learn on your own time. You're here to work. So, if you really want this job, you need to go home and, spend 3 hours a night teaching yourself the latest whatever. So
Yeah.
I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that. So thank you.
Absolutely. I spend time outside of work learning, personally, as well, on top of the fact that I also get the chance to learn at work. But not everybody has the luxury of that extra time, so that's totally understandable.
As you talk about managing your expectations, so in your work like with Whiteboard,
Mm-hmm.
how has managing your expectations helped you with the kind of projects you've been working at a company like Whiteboard?
So we definitely used to plan and commit way far out. And we basically learned the hard way, like a lot of people do, that doesn't work well. It's just starting to learn kind of it takes some time and experience, but learning your own capacity for the day. Saying, you know what, there's no way, if you ask me to meet with you, there's no way that I'm going to be able to do this other thing that I already committed to. So I'm going to have to say no to the meeting. Like, I don't want to, right? Like, it's not like I'm shutting you down because I intentionally am trying to avoid you, but I can't meet with you and do this other thing to the best of my ability. And my job is to do this other thing first, right? Like producing. And so that's probably, did that answer the question relatively? Okay, all right.
I'll make it short.
Yeah.
Do you think work-life balance is a state that can be achieved, or do you think it's a myth that needs to be updated?
I'm the wrong person to ask. Life is so much a part of my work, and work is so much a part of my life because I love what I do. But if you hate what you do, then you have to find a balance, because you can't hate every minute of your day. And hopefully the people in this room don't hate what you do, but some people do. Some people don't like their jobs. So I have a hard time finding the line. I think the most important line there for me is relationships. So if I start, doing too much that's outside of my relational development, like with my wife, for example, then that starts cutting into something that priority-wise is more important to me. But work-life balance, I certainly don't think it's a state. I think it's a thing that changes every day, and you have to figure that out. I don't believe in overworking. That anybody who thought that that's what I meant, that's not what I meant at all. I don't think overworking is useful. I think it actually hurts you in the long run, and you're not as productive. But I do believe that if you're enjoying what you're doing, why not work? I know that, again, I don't believe in working to the bone, right? Or working until 4:35 in the morning, like I was saying earlier. We have to have time for margin, for rest. And you can enjoy that rest just as much as you can enjoy work. So yeah, I don't think it's a state. I think it's something that changes every day.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Y'all give Jonathan a round of applause.